Seni budaya harus kita junjung. G20 kita sukseskan.
Let's discuss Indonesia's G20 presidency.
Indonesia merasa terhormat untuk meneruskan Presidensi G20 tahun 2022.
Indonesia is taking over the G20 presidency beginning from December 2021 to November 2022. Under the grand theme of Recover Together, Recover Stronger, Indonesia's G20 presidency will focus on promoting an equal, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable global economic recovery to address recovery gap between developed and developing countries. Yet, the country is presented with a tough challenge to master the opportunity in setting the agenda of the G20 in representation of other developing economies for a more inclusive and sustainable model of economic recovery beyond simply organizing luxurious meetings. The G20, or the Group of 20, is the world's premier intergovernmental multilateral platform, connecting 20 of the largest economies in the world to collectively commit to address global major issues related to global economy. The G20's main trait lies in its membership. The members of the G20 represents more than 80 to 85% of the world's output, 75 to 80% of the total of international trade, and 60% of the world's population. Albeit without formal binding agreements, by the virtue of its members alone, the commitments and visions made from the work inside the G20 can be crucial for the world. It has therefore the power to guide important policies and roadmaps. The G20's main product in each cycle of presidency is a communiqué expressing members' commitments and vision for the future, drafted from the chosen recommendations and deliverables from ministerial meetings and other work streams inside the G20. In essence, these agreed commitments and visions are the product of the many coordinated agendas and work between G20 leaders, who will try to represent not just their own country's interests, but the collective they represent. A notable success of the G20 has been a global, coordinated response following the 2008 financial crisis. The second G20 summit in 2009 managed to produce an agreement to inject massive financial aid into the global economy. Since then, G20 has produced commitments towards implementing macroprudential policies increase the lending capacity of the International Monetary Fund, as well as the overall strengthening of international financial regulatory system. Key benefit of the G20 would be the opportunity for the biggest countries in the world to harmonize and align domestic policies to the decisions taken by the grouping across many ministerial level meetings and summits, culminating into what many observed as better coordination between countries. In the last decade, experts have observed G20's transition from a mere crisis response group into a proactive agenda-setting forum of the world's most powerful countries.
Now, Indonesia expected to come up with a presidency that shows leadership. And of course, in doing so, President Joko Widodo clearly stated that we want to prioritize on areas, three main focus, which are addressing, enhancing the global health architecture, noting that we have not yet come out of the crisis, digital transformation, whereby many issues, many action in the world will rely on the ability of countries coming to the future with digital know-how. And of course, lastly, on this energy transition, which at the end would certainly address the issue such as climate change.
But during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, critics have called out the forum for being irrelevant or at least inflexible when it comes to responding to non-financial crises. It was overall seen as failing to actively come out with innovative solution to the economic and health crisis, at least compared to its rapid success in responding to the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. While it is worth noting that the G20 had successfully agreed on measures like debt restructuring for low-income countries or financial support for developing countries, the lack of realizations over the many commitments agreed is also a key issue. With its own experience in COVID-19, in particular, the hardship Indonesia faces as it struggles to keep the health system from overload and the concessions it made to acquire batches of vaccines, Indonesia knows the importance of promoting solidarity in treating a transnational crisis. Unequal global vaccine distribution, notoriously exemplified by trends of vaccine nationalism and hoarding, has been a key issue that Indonesia repeatedly highlights in multiple international forums. Aside from continuing successful measures, such as debt suspension, Indonesia plans to improve the coordination system on countries' exit policies to recover and strives to promote sustainable and inclusive finance policies, regulation, and infrastructure. Indonesia's major homework would not only be to ensure continuity of G20's agenda with the other Troika members, which are the previous and the upcoming presidents of the G20, in this case Italy and India, but also in boosting G20's relevance to developing economies like itself, notably in facing the ongoing health and economic crisis.
Well, as I mentioned before, the pandemic is not yet over. And of course, the pandemic has impacted many countries in the world. There are increasing gaps between the rich and poor countries, high inequalities between the low income and the high income countries. Inequalities not only in terms of development, but inequalities in terms of getting the health capabilities up to speed. Question of vaccination that has not been able to be reached. The target of WHO and G20 that countries would have a global vaccination rate of at least 40% of the population by the end of 2021 has not been able to be achieved by more than 90 countries of the world. 40 countries even have less than 15% of vaccination rate. So we still need to work together closely in this regard. The key word here is inclusivity. The key word here is we don't want to have anyone left behind.
The G20 has been known to have been successful in its finance track, but less so in its Sherpa track, particularly in accommodating recommendations from working groups in charge of non-financial issues like health and climate. Agendas like pursuing digital reforms, empowerment of human resources, including women and youth, and addressing the issue of climate change and sustainability, particularly to promote global partnership and funding in support of energy transition to clean and renewable energy, will also be on the forefront of Indonesia's presidency.
However, we need to look at two aspects in considering the value or the importance of those agenda in the making of better global economic environment. The first one is how crucial the agenda is in dealing with the current and emerging issues. This is quite important because sometimes G20 agendas become quite broad and perhaps also include those are important but not really emerging, not really urgent agenda. So those crucial agenda have to have a priority. This is the first one. The second one is how those priority agenda actually should be carried out or should have an impact at the global level.
Perspective, actually, the most valuable, it should be related to COVID-19 and economic recovery. So the global health architecture. This is because there is a very big urgency for the G20 to deliver and come up with a concrete and coordinated plan to address some of the pressing issues, for example, the unequal vaccination progress, the lack of sustainable funding mechanism, which is not in place at the moment. And I think Indonesia has proposed some of the initiatives. One of the initiatives is actually the Global Health Fund mechanism through the G20, which need around $15 billion per year. I think this is very important because we know the new variants keep coming. One might be related to the G20 effort to accelerate vaccine production and also expedite its distribution. I think last but not least, probably there's also initiative regarding the global health protocol, which require a very strong regulatory cooperation among countries to make international traveling more efficient. Nowadays you need a lot of documents, a lot of days for quarantine, and it becomes very, very costly to travel.
Check the mic and make sure it sounds.
Through a successful G20 presidency, Indonesia can expect a boost in its international recognition As a leading emerging economy, it will be a huge opportunity for Indonesia to fight for the aspirations and interests of developing nations in a bid to create fairer global governance and particularly to strengthen global solidarity in overcoming the threat of climate change and promoting sustainable development. In the short term, its tourism sector and products will likely receive a spotlight in promotion. As emphasized during the opening ceremony of Indonesia's G20 presidency, this would bring a multiplier effect on the domestic economy. The country is expecting an increase in domestic consumption by up to 1.7 trillion rupiah, an increase of 7.47 trillion rupiah to the GDP. Plus, with more than 150 meetings being held in 19 cities and over 18,000 delegates to attend, the G20 presidency is expected to create around 33,000 jobs. Moreover, Indonesia's presidency of the G20 will mark the first time a Southeast Asian nation ever hold the prestige of doing so. For Southeast Asia, whose development levels, political conditions, and now the pandemic recovery phases have been massively different, a representative of their own would only serve them well.
If there is a concrete plan for the G20 regarding this, how to decentralize the vaccine supply chain, then ASEAN should be prepared to strengthen its cooperation. Because I think both ASEAN and Indonesia can play an important role as a hub for vaccine distribution and production, of course. And the second one, I think this is also very important regarding the traveling regulation. We know that ASEAN countries really rely on tourism sector. I think if Indonesia can bring this initiative, how to harmonize this regulation to the G20 and then try to implement it in ASEAN, I think this will be a huge win for Indonesia and ASEAN. And
if the G20 manage to deal with the global challenges, then it would help Indonesia or ASEAN in achieving our goal, like to escape the middle income trap and to become developed economy.
In terms of how it is connected to ASEAN, for instance, every G20 meeting, the ASEAN chair is duly invited. In our case, Cambodia will be representing ASEAN. Aside from Singapore, will also be invited in our presidency. In the finance track meeting, Indonesia is inviting all 5 ASEAN member countries, which is Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, among others. So the discussion will be certainly add value to what we are going to discuss in the economic strategy, how we recover from the global economic malaise that is happening all around the world. In other words, a comprehensive approach is needed. Relation between the regional discussion and the multilateral discussion are certainly connected one way and another. And we hope that we could certainly provide stability, we would provide recovery, and by working together, we would recover strongly out of this crisis.
Solidarity, for instance, in treating the crisis brought forward by the COVID-19 pandemic as a collective problem, is a framework that is desperately needed by Southeast Asians. better representation would likely lead to better agenda-setting capacity, demonstrate the region's growing influence, and shift global attention to the region's needs.
Saya menyampaikan selamat pada Italia yang telah sukses menjalankan presidensi G20 di tahun 2021. Dan Indonesia merasa terhormat untuk meneruskan presidensi G20 tahun 2022. Kami akan menjamu Yang Mulia dan Bapak Ibu di hamparan pantai Bali yang indah, yang menginspirasi gagasan-gagasan inovatif untuk produktivitas G20 ke depan. Sampai bertemu di Indonesia, terima kasih.